I initially started studying sociology because I was taking a class called social psychology. And in that class, I was learning about all the ways in which invisible forces were shaping my lives. And I never saw it. Our lives are shaped by sociological structures that we don't see. But sociology led me down other places to say, even stuff that we can't even imagine is shaping our lives. Take a social psychology class and take a look at this. Okay? So, one series of factors and forces are associated with, say, gender. And, like women in this classroom are managing ways of being in the world that are just differently than men. And I'm talking about binary folks, right? Not non-binary folks. That have a different way of seeing the world and experiencing the world than men do. You're just managing different things. Another one is race, ethnicity, and culture. That people of different racial and ethnic groups have a different experience of life and experience of the world than people of other groups. And those experiences shape them. So when I look around the room here and I see people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different races, different ancestries, and I think you're from different areas of the world, or your parents are, maybe your grandparents or somebody, different religions, different customs. It's like you just have a different experience of life than somebody of a different group. This idea that, we're all one group, we're all one nation. It's like, no, we are all one nation, but we're one nation built of many, many different subcultures. I happen to really be fascinated by the one nation idea, but I'm also fascinated by the subcultures. And I'm really ultimately fascinated by how it is that a person with brown skin, what the experience is of a person with brown skin versus somebody with really darkly pigmented skin versus somebody with really light skin, how they experience the world differently as they walk through life. Just fascinated by that. And for me, it's not, none of it is, it doesn't have to be negative or bad or like, oh my God, this is so terrible, and always pointing out the negative stuff and the bad stuff. I'm a sociologist. I'm just deeply curious about all of it. So I'm really curious about race. And so I'm interested about the ways in which race shapes our lives such that we don't see it. And then unless I sit down and really talk to other people, like, say you as a black woman, if I don't talk to you, if I don't really hear the kinds of things you're saying about living, about your life, about your hair, about skin products, about one thing after another, then I would never know the different ways in which you experience the world, how you experience the world differently than me. And if you don't ask me, or if you don't ask her, then you will never know how she experiences the world. And this is how it is. So this is what this class is about. And that's why I teach it, because I'm utterly fascinated by all of these issues and all these factors and forces. This is critical race theory. This is the foundation of critical race theory, is to say, you know what? We all have different experiences. Race itself is a sociological construct. And it's worth looking at, analyzing, and talking about the different experiences that people have. We don't have to focus on the negative all the time. You know what I mean? It just happens. It just so happens that a lot of people who talk about race, they're always talking about the inequality, right? And the ways in which treatment is different, and the ways in which problems occur, and all of the things that are not equal and not fair. People are often talking about fairness or lack thereof, because that's just what gets out there. This is what gets talked about. But most of the conversations I'm having that are rooted in critical race theory, meaning I'm thinking about ancestry, and I'm thinking about race, and I'm thinking about our biological differences and cultural differences and so on. Most of the conversations I have aren't rooted in issues of fairness or lack thereof. It's just that that's this thing that kind of the media just takes hold of and just kind of jams at us. But this class is not going to be just about that. This class is going to be about all the really fascinating things that are happening to people who have different cultures and ancestries and races and so on. This is like one of the foundational cornerstones of what would be critical race theory. That human beings have different personal experiences of the world that grow out of their sociological, the sociological differences or trajectories or histories of people of their groups.
One of the words that you were using to describe the different classes of people is you used biologically different. So my question would be so aside from the skin color, do you believe that there's a biological difference between black people and white people?
There's no set number of racial groups. I can't divide this class up into X number or Y number of racial groups, because that just doesn't exist, right? Basically, you have these physical differences, and you got to use some basis upon which you're going to make decisions about who belongs in one group or another group, right? But if you look out here and look at all the brown people in this room, where are they going to go? If we just use skin, for example, right? And you would agree with us. If we lined everybody up in a straight line, and the person with the most darkly pigmented skin, that's, that is almost has a blue tint to it, right? And then you just line everybody out, and you go to the most lightly pigmented skin. A white person with no skin pigmentation whatsoever. Their skin is almost translucent. You can see through the skin to see their veins. And they're way at that end. And now we got to divide that line of people, which is all these people in this room, into racial groups. It's we couldn't do it, right? So it's so race then becomes this sort of confluence of ancestry, geography, sociology, biology, ethnicity, all of these things that come together, and then in a certain sense, it's meaningless. And it is meaningless. And if it were up to me, I would stop using the term. And mostly I talk about ancestry.
If I had been introduced to critical race theory in the definition that you provided, I would have had a more positive viewpoint of it.
Yeah.
Because the idea that the races are kind of interconnected and connected to the way that we go through life and the relationships that we have, all that stuff. I'm okay with that. That makes sense to me. I think just maybe the definition of critical race theory has been lost in society today, just because of how it's being portrayed in the news, and I don't agree with how it's being applied to the education system, but the definition you kind of gave made sense to me.
Well, so for example, when I give talks to 8th graders or 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders, right, and I talk about our bodies and differences in our bodies and how and why we have different shaped noses and eyes and texture of hair and, all sorts of things, right? And I talk about the different historical experiences that groups have, and I speak to a 12 or a 13-year-old or whatever, but not anti-white, condemning white people, all this kind of stuff, which is how I got perceived this past summer, which is come on, man. That's just the absurdity of that, right? So if I do that and I say, isn't it awesome to look across the room and see people, to know that people have different experiences than you and are different from you, and we can share those experiences, when I'm on the other side of the planet and I'm with people that are just have a completely different biological foundation of their lives, let alone sociological, cultural, etc. To me, it's utterly fascinating. Right? And it doesn't have to be negative, and we're always beating it down, but that's the world out of which critical race theory emerged. And it partly emerged because in white people, so let me say this to the three of you, it partly emerged as this thing where this way of understanding the world that you had to really convince white people that this is real. That black and brown people have a different experience of the world than you all white people do. So come on, listen to us. And if white people had simply, the sociologists who think like I think, which is well, of course they have different experiences of the world. Of course you do. Just like tall people have different experiences than short people. Left-handed people, when you walk into a room like this and you're left-handed, every room you walk into, you already know where the left-handed desks are. And if you don't know that already, they're on this side of each one of these rows. And if you're left-handed, you know where the left-handed desks are in 100 Thomas. And you know your whole life. You know, you're managing being left-handed constantly. It's not a bad thing. It's not like, oh, poor left-handed people. No, you're just managing that. You're thinking about it. It's part of who you are.
Yeah, so I really agree with what Eric had to say. I think like society definitely construes this idea that like critical race theory is like all negative and it's bad. And I've personally never heard of critical race theory in a positive sense. So just like hearing about being able to like listen to different experiences and all the positives that do come about it, I think like is going to be really cool and something different.
We're also going to talk about some of the negative stuff, right? I mean, that you also got to talk about that, but it's not just that, and it wouldn't be just negative if people were listening to it.